A wide gray lake at dawn. Mist so thick the far shore is only a rumor. In the center of the water, held up by a wooden platform, floats a two-story house painted the color of a dove. Copper roof, a small bell tower, every window dark, except one. On the front porch, a coffee mug sits on a small wooden table. Steam has stopped rising from it. It has been sitting there for 6 weeks. Inside, in a reading room lined floor to ceiling, with books, a bookshelf hangs open 1 inch on a hidden hinge. Behind it, a small blue door has been waiting to be found. Cold air rises from underneath. At the bottom of a narrow staircase, a hand-cranked film projector points at a bare wall. Wiped clean. Prepared. A reel already loaded. A cream-colored envelope propped against its base. One word on the front, in careful blue ink, a name. And upstairs, a young woman in a butter yellow sweater sets her foot on the first step down. The morning she found the door behind the bookshelf, Rosemary Ellsworth was still wearing the yellow sweater she had folded away 13 years before. It smelled like cedar, like paper, like the drawer at the bottom of a life she had never asked for. Her hands smelled like coffee too. Coffee from a mug that was not hers. Coffee that had been sitting cold on a kitchen table for 6 weeks. Coffee somebody had poured and set down and meant to come back to, and hadn't. My name is Rosemary Ellsworth. I am 21 years old. I have been alone since I was 8. And by the end of that Tuesday, I would understand that alone was a story somebody had told me, not a fact. Because what I found in a floating house on Lantern Lake 3 weeks after a lawyer I had never met called me at the diner where I worked. The 6 to 2 shift would break open every wall I had built since I was a child. It would return to me a mother I did not remember. A grandfather who had photographed me through a window in November snow. A voice on a cassette tape that had been waiting for me under a floorboard for 22 years. And it would show me finally that the couple who did not come back for me on that December afternoon in a butter yellow sweater were not the beginning of my abandonment. They were the tail end of somebody else's crime. But to understand how a small brass key and a folded piece of paper undid 13 years of silence, I need to take you back to that December afternoon, to a parlor at a place called St. Bernice, to a little girl in a butter yellow sweater who sat by a window and waited for a family that never came. She was 8 years old. It was the year the pipes at St. Bernice froze twice in 1 week. The year the woman who ran the home, Sister Mildred, had told the children not to run in the halls because their footsteps knocked the icicles off the eaves, and somebody was going to lose an eye. That morning, Sister Mildred pulled a sweater out of a plastic bag and held it up to the light. Butter yellow, soft as a spring pear, the kind of yellow that looked warm even when the room was cold. "Put this on, sweetheart. They will be here soon." Rosemary pulled the sweater over her head. The sleeves were a little long. The cuffs came down over her thumbs. She stood in front of the small mirror in the hallway and turned once, and then again. She had never in her life owned anything the color of butter. The couple had come 3 times before. They had brought her a coloring book, a pink flashlight that clicked on and off with a satisfying small sound. And on the last visit, they had told her they would come back before Christmas. To take her home. That was the word they used. Home. Rosemary had turned the word over in her mouth for 2 weeks. Practiced it in the mirror upstairs quietly so nobody would hear. Home. 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 It was such a small word for such a large thing. That Tuesday, she sat in the window seat in the front parlor at 8 o'clock in the morning. She sat there through the sound of the pipes clanging. She sat there through Sister Mildred coming in twice to ask if she wanted a piece of toast. Both times she refused, because she did not want to be chewing when the car pulled up. She watched the driveway. She watched it turn from gray to white as the light came up. She watched it as the trees threw thin blue shadows across the snow. She watched it as the street light down the block flickered on early because the sky had never really brightened. She watched it until 4:52 in the afternoon. She had counted the blinks of that street light 138 times before Sister Mildred came in a third time and stood in the doorway. Sister Mildred did not say anything at first. She just walked over, sat down on the window seat, put a hand on Rosemary's knee. Sweetheart. That was all. That was the whole sentence. But Rosemary had already learned the shape of adult voices. She knew what a soft one meant. She knew what people said when they did not want to say the next part. The words came out anyway. Small, hopeful sentences she offered up like coins she was trying to spend. Maybe they had a flat tire. Maybe they got lost. Maybe tomorrow. Sister Mildred did not answer any of them. She just pulled Rosemary closer. Then very carefully, like a woman setting down a piece of glass on a hard floor. Sister Mildred told her she did not think they were coming. Rosemary did not cry. She sat very still. She counted the blinks of the streetlight. She got to 100 and started over. That night, after Sister Mildred had brushed out her hair and put her in the bed by the radiator, Rosemary got up in the dark. She took the butter yellow sweater off the chair. She folded it. She folded it small. She put it in the bottom of the wooden drawer where they kept her 2 other shirts and her 1 pair of jeans. She kept it there for the next 13 years. Even after it stopped fitting, even after the sleeves reached only to her elbows, even after St. Bernice moved her to the foster placement out on the Hollister farm when she was 16. Even after she left the Hollister farm at 18 with a canvas bag and $23 in birthday money, she kept the sweater because some part of her, the part that had never quite finished being 8 years old, kept thinking that maybe one day someone would come. And when they did, she wanted proof that she had been ready. The Hollister farm was 40 miles outside of Copperton on a stretch of dirt road that did not get plowed until 3 days after every snow. The house was pale green. The porch had a soft spot in the boards near the front steps that had never been fixed. There was a rooster named Buster who ran the driveway like he owned it, and who had bitten Rosemary twice in her first week. Mr. Hollister was a shape that moved between the barn and the kitchen and the barn again. He did not talk much. He did not look at her much either, which Rosemary would come to understand was almost a kindness. Mrs. Hollister did the talking. Mrs. Hollister did all of the talking. The first time Rosemary met her at the county office, Mrs. Hollister looked her up and down and said to the caseworker, not to Rosemary, that the girl was older than she had asked for, but she supposed the girl would do. She'll do. That sentence lived in Rosemary's chest for 2 years. It moved in like a piece of furniture. She could not get it out. Mrs. Hollister had 2 daughters of her own. Sadie was 12, June was 9. They had a bedroom on the 2nd floor with pink curtains and a canopy bed, and a shelf of books that had never been read but looked pretty on the shelf. Rosemary slept in what used to be the mudroom. It had been converted, sort of. There was a mattress on a wooden frame and a hook on the wall for her coat, and a small window that looked out at the hen house. In the winter, the water in the glass on her nightstand froze by morning. She learned to sleep on her side, because the mattress had a spring near the middle that pushed up through the fabric if you turned onto your back. She was up at 4 every day. The cows did not wait. She milked. She fed the chickens. She scraped ice off the water troughs. She scrubbed the kitchen floor. She hung the laundry. She peeled potatoes. She minded June when Mrs. Hollister had errands in town. She helped Sadie with math homework, though nobody had ever taught Rosemary math. She went to school when there was time, which was not often. Mrs. Hollister had a way of announcing at breakfast in the same voice she used to ask for the salt that there was too much to do today. Rosemary would nod. Rosemary would always nod. She had learned that a girl who was useful was safer than a girl who was seen. That first Christmas at the Hollisters, Sadie got a bicycle, blue with white streamers on the handlebars. June got a set of art supplies in a wooden box with a brass clasp. Rosemary got a scarf. It was gray. It had a small hole near the fringe. Mrs. Hollister explained without much interest that she had found it in the church donation bin, and that it was still good. Rosemary thanked her 3 times, because that was the polite number, because she had learned very young that you could not refuse a gift without being seen, and being seen was more dangerous than being cold. She wore that scarf all winter. The second Christmas was worse. Because on the second Christmas, Rosemary had gotten used to hoping in a small, quiet way. She had allowed herself to think maybe this year, maybe a book, maybe a sweater without a hole, maybe just a card with her name on it, spelled correctly. Mrs. Hollister gave her a pair of thick wool socks. There was a small brown stain on the heel of one that Mrs. Hollister said would probably wash out. Sadie looked at her socks. Sadie looked at her own new snow boots. And Sadie made a small, unfortunate face and said out loud in a voice not at all unkind that maybe Rosemary just liked practical things. Rosemary did not argue. Rosemary had been 11 years old when she stopped arguing. There was one moment on that farm she never told anybody about. It happened in her second spring there. She was 17. She was hanging sheets on the line. And a small blue truck she did not recognize slowed down at the end of the Hollister driveway. She looked up. The driver was too far away for her to see his face. Just an old man in a cap, his hands on the wheel. He sat there for maybe 15 seconds, long enough for her to feel him watching, long enough for something inside her chest to lift up a little, the way a small animal lifts its head at the sound of a familiar footstep. Then Mrs. Hollister came out on the porch and yelled that the sheets were not going to hang themselves. The blue truck drove away. Rosemary told herself she had imagined it, because a girl who had been left on a window seat once did not get to imagine that people came back. That kind of imagining led to butter yellow sweaters at the bottom of drawers. But she thought about that truck for the rest of the week. And she did not know it then, and she would not know it for another 4 years. But that had been him. That had been the second time. He had driven 3 hours. He had rolled down his window. He had sat at the edge of a driveway that was not his. And he had watched a girl in a hand-me-down sundress hang sheets that were not hers. And he had driven away because he was still not allowed to close the distance. She left 3 weeks after her 18th birthday. She did not plan it, not really. It happened on a Tuesday in April. She was hanging laundry on the line behind the barn. The wind kept catching the sheets and slapping them against her face. She had been up since 3:30 because a heifer was calving. She had not eaten since the night before. Mrs. Hollister came out onto the porch. She called across the yard that once Rosemary was done, the pantry needed organizing, and the girls needed a snack. Rosemary did not answer. She stood in the wetted grass with a sheet in her hand, and she felt something inside her chest, not break, more like a door that had been closed for a very long time, and she felt it swing open, just a little, just enough. That night, after everyone was asleep, she folded her 3 shirts and her 1 pair of jeans into her canvas bag. She took the butter yellow sweater from where it lived at the bottom of her drawer. She put it on top of everything else because it belonged on top, because it was the only thing in the bag that was actually hers. She took the $23 she had saved from birthday cards over the years. Birthday cards from strangers, from a distant aunt of the Hollisters who did not know her name and always wrote to the girl. She walked to the end of the driveway. She did not look back at the house. She looked at the sky, which was very dark, which had no moon that night, and she started walking toward town. She did not leave a note, because there was no one in that house who would have read it and been sad. Copperton was small enough that everyone knew everyone, small enough that she was worried at first that someone would call the Hollisters and tell them where she was. No one did, because no one really noticed her, which was in a strange way the first freedom she had ever known. She found a job at Halstead's diner within a week. She was a good waitress, trained by hard women to move fast, to remember orders, to smile, without meaning it, to never take up space. She worked the 6 to 2 shift, and then the 2 to 10 on Saturdays. She saved up. She rented a room above the auto shop on 3rd Street. The auto shop belonged to a man named Wilder Kane. He was in his 60s, silver hair kept short. He wore the same denim jacket every day of the year. He charged her $200 a month for the room, which she would find out much later was less than half what the last tenant had paid. He never asked her questions. He waved when she came home at night. Sometimes he left a paper bag with an apple or a wrapped sandwich on her doorknob. He never said it was from him. She thought maybe he did that for everybody. She had no reason to think otherwise. The room was small. The room was hers. The first night she slept in it, she cried. Not because she was sad, because she could not remember the last time she had slept somewhere that did not belong to somebody else. By the time she was 21, she had a routine. She had the diner. She had her room above the auto shop. She had a small pot of basil on the windowsill that she was very proud of, because she had kept it alive for a whole year, which was the longest she had kept anything alive, which was the longest anything had let her. She had a rosemary plant on the sill too. She had bought that one at a hardware store 2 winters ago because it had been on clearance for $4. She had never asked herself why she had reached for that plant instead of the mint or the thyme. It just felt like the one. She did not have friends, not really. She had a woman at the diner named Marcel who worked the morning shift and gossiped about the regulars. Marcel was in her 50s. Marcel had a laugh like a screen door. Marcel called every woman honey and every man sugar. Marcel was the closest thing to a mother figure Rosemary had ever allowed near her, which was to say they had never once talked about anything that mattered. And that had felt to Rosemary like intimacy. She had Wilder downstairs who always waved. She had a nod from the pastor at the corner church on Sundays. She had two of the regulars at the diner who remembered how she took her own coffee, an older man named Fritzell, who came in every Tuesday and Thursday at 6:30 sharp, and a widow named Loetta, who ate the same egg over easy and dry toast at 8 every Saturday, and told Rosemary one time in a very quiet voice that Rosemary reminded her of a niece she had lost. Rosemary had not known what to do with that, so she had refilled Loetta's coffee, and she had left 20 extra sugar packets at the edge of the table for a woman who did not take sugar. And Loetta had smiled at her. Some nights Rosemary would lie in bed and listen to the trucks going by on 3rd Street, and she would wonder who was in those trucks, where they were going, whether anyone was waiting up for them. She never let herself finish that thought, because finishing a thought like that was how you started expecting things. And expecting things was how you ended up at 8 years old in a butter yellow sweater at a window. She had learned better than that. She thought she had. The phone call came on a Tuesday, because of course it did, because everything in Rosemary's life had happened on a Tuesday. The couple, the scarf from the donation bin, the night she walked to the end of the driveway. Tuesdays owed her nothing, and still they kept coming. It was raining, not hard, the steady kind, the kind of rain that made the diner smell like wet wool and burnt coffee and the vinyl of booths people had slid across 1,000 times. She had just refilled the water glasses at table 4 when Marcel waved her over to the phone at the counter. Marcel mouthed the word lawyer at her. Marcel held the receiver out like it was a fish she was not sure was dead. Rosemary wiped her hands on her apron. She picked up the phone. She held it against her ear the way you would hold something that might explode. The voice on the other end belonged to an old man. Male. Careful. A voice that had been trained a long time ago to say difficult things slowly. He asked her if she was Miss Rosemary Ellsworth. Then he introduced himself as Harlan Whitcomb, attorney, calling on behalf of the estate of Mr. Ansel Ellsworth. She waited for the name to mean something. It did not. The name was not familiar, she told him. There was a pause on the other end, a polite one. The pause of a man who had made this call before in some form to some other person, and had learned that the polite pause was the kindest thing he had. Then Harlan Whitcomb told her very gently that Ansel Ellsworth had been her grandfather. She almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because sometimes the body does strange things when it does not know what else to do. The words came out before she thought about them, that she did not have a grandfather, which sounded ridiculous even as she said it, because of course she had a grandfather. Everyone had a grandfather. She just had never met hers. She had never known his name. And she had, at some point around the age of 10 or 11, stopped believing that any of the missing people in her life were real people. They had become in her mind weather, just conditions she had been born under. Harlan Whitcomb was very kind about it. He said he understood this was a great deal to take in. She stared at the pie case across the counter. She stared at the lemon meringue. He explained. Her grandfather had passed away 6 weeks ago. The will named her as sole beneficiary of a property about 90 minutes north of Copperton, a house on a lake called Lantern, a rather unusual house, and its contents. She had never been there. He knew. And then, and this was the part she would remember for the rest of her life, Harlan Whitcomb cleared his throat very softly, the way people do when they are about to say something they have practiced saying. There was one more thing he told her that she should know before she decided anything. Her grandfather had spent 22 years looking for her. She did not answer. She could not. Because the words landed somewhere inside her chest that had been sealed shut for so long. So long, she had forgotten it was there. She stood in the diner. She held the phone. The lemon meringue stared at her from behind the glass. Marcel was refilling coffee at table 6 and telling somebody about her son's new dog. The rain was steady against the window. Somewhere in the kitchen a bell dinged. And Rosemary Ellsworth, 21 years old, orphaned by paperwork, raised by strangers, stood very still and tried very hard not to let the small voice inside her start hoping. Because hoping was dangerous. Because hoping was what 8-year-olds did in butter yellow sweaters. She told him she did not understand. Harlan Whitcomb said he would like to help her understand, and he asked gently when she could come. She took 3 days off from the diner. Marcel did not push. That was one of the reasons Rosemary had come to trust her. Marcel just chewed her gum and told her to come back and tell her when she could. Wilder was on the wooden bench outside the auto shop the next morning, drinking coffee out of a metal thermos, reading a paperback with the spine broken. He looked up. He asked her where she was headed. 90 minutes north. He set the thermos down. He did not stand up. He held out the keys to the Buick. She started to refuse. He cut her off. She could take it. She just had to fill it up before she brought it back. The Buick was his, old, gray, rounded in the corners the way cars used to be. It smelled like tobacco and canvas in the small pine tree hanging from the rearview mirror that he had probably bought in 1998. She hesitated at the driver's side door. She asked him if he knew why she was going. Something moved behind his eyes, something that had been sitting there for a while. He told her quietly that he knew what she should know. Not more. She could not understand that answer. Not yet. So she took the keys. He said one more thing as she was turning to go, that whatever she found up there, she should not come back scared. Come back different if she had to, but not scared. She did not know what to say to that. So she just nodded, and she drove. The road to Lantern Lake wound through country she had never seen before. Wooded, quiet, the kind of trees that looked like they had opinions. She followed the directions Harlan Whitcomb had emailed her, printed out on a page she had folded 4 times in her pocket. Turn at the split birch, left at the mailbox shaped like a fish, down the gravel road to the water. She almost missed it. The lake did not announce itself. One moment she was driving through woods. The next moment the trees opened up. And there it was, long, silver, still, wrapped in early morning mist so thick the far shore was only a suggestion. So quiet it looked like the earth was holding its breath. She parked at the top of a small hill. She got out. The air smelled like pine sap and wet stone and something colder underneath. Something that was almost but not quite the smell of home. Whatever home was supposed to smell like. She had been trying to figure that out for 13 years. She walked down to the water. There was a dock, old, wooden. Some of the boards were newer than others, patched over the years by somebody who cared. And at the end of the dock, floating on the surface of the lake like a stubborn old thought, was the house. It was not like any house she had ever seen. It sat on a wide, flat platform, the kind that was half barge, half foundation. 2 stories tall, painted a soft dove gray. The roof was copper weathered to a soft blue-green. A small bell tower rose from the peak with a copper bell inside it dulled by weather and time. The shutters had once been white. Now they were the color of driftwood. At the back of the house, connected by a short plank bridge, floated a smaller structure. A little glass room, a greenhouse, windows all along the sides. Something growing inside, she could see the shapes of leaves pressed against the glass. Green, alive. Somebody had been watering them until 6 weeks ago, and now they were reaching for a light that had left them. Rosemary stood at the edge of the dock. She held the brass key Harlan Whitcomb had mailed to her in a small padded envelope. The tag on the key was cardstock. Somebody had written on it in blue ink in a careful slanted hand for Rosemary. When you come, not if, when. She was very cold. She was not sure she was breathing. The thought came before she could stop it. What if there's no one there? Which was ridiculous, because of course there was no one there. That was the whole point. The man who had lived in that house was gone. That was why she was standing on this dock. That was why the key was in her hand. Except there was another thought underneath the first one. What if there is not a person, but something? Something the man had left behind. Something waiting. She stepped onto the dock. The boards creaked in the soft wooden voice, like a house saying you're here. About time. She walked to the door. She put the key in the lock. It turned cleanly, like the lock had been waiting. The first thing she noticed was the smell. Cedar, old paper, lake water, and something else. Something that was almost but not quite coffee. The second thing was the light. It came in through lace curtains older than she was. Filtered, soft, the kind of light that turned dust into small floating pieces of gold. The third thing was that the house did not feel empty. It felt paused. There was a coffee mug on the small kitchen table. There was still coffee in it, cold, ringed at the bottom. But it had not been rinsed. It had just been set down, like somebody had meant to come back. There was a pair of reading glasses next to the mug, folded on top of a folded newspaper. The newspaper was 6 weeks old. There was a rocking chair by the window that faced the lake. There was a knitted blanket over the back of the chair. There was a book on the arm of the chair spine cracked open, held in place by a small leather bookmark shaped like a fish. Rosemary took 2 steps into the house, then 3. Then she stopped, because she did not know where to put herself. Because every corner of the room had been arranged by a life that was not hers. Because the man who had lived here had known she was coming, in some way, had left the mug and the glasses and the book like a table set for a guest who had not arrived in time. She sat down. She did not mean to. Her knees just gave. She sat in the rocking chair by the window. She had never in her life sat in a chair that faced a view. Every chair she had ever sat in had faced work. A stove, a desk, a customer, a pile of laundry. This chair faced water. She looked out at the lake. She rocked once, twice, and a small voice inside her said very clearly, "I don't know who I am in a room like this." She sat there a long time, long enough for the mist to lift off the far shore, long enough for the light in the room to move across the floor and touch the toe of her boot, long enough that she began for the first time in her adult life to notice the sound of her own breathing. Then she stood up, because she had come here for a reason, and she was going to find out what it was. The house had rooms, more than she expected. A living room with the rocking chair and the wood stove, and the small kitchen table, and the coffee mug that was still waiting. A kitchen with a hand pump for the sink and a little cast iron pot on the stove, and a jar of honey on the counter that had gone thick and crystalline over the last 6 weeks. A bedroom with a metal bed frame and a quilt in dark blue and cream. A quilt that looked like somebody had made it, somebody who cared. Upstairs up a narrow staircase that turned once was a second bedroom. Smaller, simpler. It had a window that looked out over the whole lake. There was a small cedar chest at the foot of the bed. She did not open it. She did not know why. Something in her stopped her hand. She walked the plank bridge to the greenhouse. It was warmer inside than the main house. Somebody had rigged a small propane heater that must have shut off when the propane ran out. There were rows of small clay pots, herbs mostly, basil, thyme, sage that had gone woody, a single stunted lemon tree in a blue ceramic pot in the corner, and along the back wall in a bed of dark soil, 6 rosemary plants, full, bushy, silvered on the underside of the leaves. Somebody had been trimming them regularly. She stood over them a long time. Her hand hovered above the nearest one. She touched it finally. She rubbed a leaf between her fingers. She lifted her hand to her nose, and she stopped breathing because it was the same smell, the exact same smell as the plant she had bought on clearance at the hardware store 2 winters ago, the one on her windowsill above the auto shop. She had thought that was just a smell. She had not known she had known it. She had known it. Somewhere in her 4-year-old body, she had known it. She walked back through the plank bridge without brushing her hand off. She could still smell the rosemary on her fingers. She could smell it in the doorway of the reading room when she got there, mixing with the cedar in the old paper. And when she stepped in, when she stood a long time in the doorway, not knowing why she was drawn to this room, and not another, the smell followed her. She ran her fingers along the spines of the books. They were old. Many were about local history. Some were about lakes. Some were about fish. Some were novels worn at the corners the way books get when somebody has actually read them and not just displayed them. There were photo albums on the lower shelves, bound in dark leather. She pulled one out. She opened it. The first page was a photograph. A young woman, 20s maybe, standing on the dock outside, barefoot, a sundress, hair the color of wheat. She was laughing at something the person behind the camera had said. Rosemary stared, because the woman in the photograph, the woman on the dock, had Rosemary's mouth, her exact mouth, the exact shape, the exact tilt at one corner, the exact way the lower lip came out just slightly when she smiled, as though she had already decided the joke was funny before it had finished. Rosemary closed the album. She could not breathe. She put it back on the shelf. She stood there a long time, her hand pressed against the spine of the album, like she was holding a door shut. Then she stepped back, and she bumped into the reading chair, and she steadied herself against the bookshelf behind her. And that was when the shelf moved. It was not much, just a soft click, just an inch of give. She froze. She thought I imagined that. She pushed the shelf again, on purpose this time. It gave. The whole bookshelf, the entire section. It swung very slowly on a hidden hinge, and behind it, set into the wall, was a small blue door, small enough that she would have to duck to go through it, painted a soft powder blue that had faded and chipped over the years. There was a brass keyhole in the middle, a very old lock, the kind that took a small brass key. Rosemary took 2 steps back. She said out loud to no one no. She said it the way you say no to a stove when you have burned your hand. Because whatever this was, whatever was behind that door, she was not ready for it. She was not ready for any of this. She had gotten here that morning. She had been in the house for maybe 90 minutes. She had already seen a photograph of a woman with her own mouth. She had already smelled a plant she had known since she was 4. And now there was a hidden door. She reached into her pocket to be sure the key was still there. Small brass, with a paper tag on it. Clearly not the key to the front door, because the front door had a bigger, newer lock. And this key was small and old, and it looked like it had been waiting a while. She stared at the door. She said out loud one more time, no, 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 which is what a person says when they know they are absolutely going to do the thing they are telling themselves not to do. She knelt down in front of the small blue door. She slid the key in. It fit. Of course it fit. She turned it. There was a soft, deep click, older than the click of the lock itself, like something inside the door had been holding its breath and had just let it out. The door creaked open. Cold air. That was the first thing, cold air rising from below. The air smelled like old paper and something older underneath. Not damp, preserved, like the smell of a museum, or a church, or a room where somebody had been keeping something on purpose. She peered in. There were stairs, wooden, narrow, going down. She could not see the bottom. She went back to the kitchen. She opened the drawer next to the sink. She had known there would be a flashlight in there. She did not know how she had known, which was the kind of thing that would bother her later, when she had time to be bothered by things. Right now, she just took the flashlight, clicked it on, walked back to the reading room. The blue door was still open. The cold air was still rising. She sat on the top step. She took one long breath. She went down. The staircase went farther than she expected, which should not have been possible, because the house was floating, because there was technically water underneath her. But the stairs kept going. She counted them, just to have something to do with her mind. At step 7, she felt the temperature change. Colder. Not by much, enough that she could feel it on the back of her neck. At step 9, the flashlight beam picked up something that did not belong on a staircase. A row of small, pale shapes on the wall. Old envelopes, she realized. Envelopes pinned to a strip of cork. Some yellowed, some newer. All of them addressed. All of them stamped. None of them opened. She did not stop to read them. Not yet. She kept going down. At step 12, she reached the bottom. The flashlight beam hit the floor, then the wall, then swept across the room. And Rosemary Ellsworth, 21 years old, once a girl in a butter yellow sweater at a window that no one came for. Once a girl in a mudroom under a bare bulb. Once a girl at the end of a driveway with a canvas bag and $23 in her pocket. Rosemary Ellsworth stopped breathing, because the room in front of her was not a basement. It was not a storeroom. It was not a cellar. It was a chamber, long, wide, impossibly larger than the platform she was standing on, which meant the floating foundation of the house was hollow, which meant the whole thing, the dove-gray walls and the copper bell and the greenhouse floating out behind, was sitting on top of a secret. Trunks lined the walls, rows of them. Old wooden trunks, some larger than others, all labeled, all neatly arranged. Shelves ran between the trunks, boxes on the shelves, manila envelopes, bundles of letters tied with string, framed photographs stacked with care, small wooden crates, ledgers, journals. There was so much. There was so much. Her mind kept trying to make it into something smaller. A storage room, an antique shop, a private collection. But it was not any of those things, because everything down here had been kept the way you keep the things that matter. Not stored, kept. Rosemary took one step forward. The flashlight beam moved. It landed on something in the far corner, something with brass fittings, something with a lens, something that was pointed at the wall, like it had been set up to show her something. And propped against the base of it was an envelope, cream-colored, with one word on the front, in blue ink, in careful slanted handwriting. Her name. Rosemary stood at the bottom of the stairs and looked at the envelope with her name on it. For a long moment she did not move, because moving would make it real, because right now she could still turn around, climb the stairs, close the small blue door, push the bookshelf back into place, drive the Buick south, give Wilder his keys, pour coffee at Halstead's, sleep in the small room above the auto shop, water the pot of basil on the windowsill, and pretend she had never come here. She could do that. She could do that if she chose to. For 13 years, she had been getting very good at pretending. She stepped forward because her body knew something her mind did not. Her body knew that a woman who has spent her whole life being kept away from things does not walk away from a door somebody has finally opened for her. Not this time. She crossed the room slowly. The flashlight beam moved with her. It slid across the trunks, across the shelves, across the bundles of letters tied with faded string, across a small pair of baby shoes wrapped in tissue paper and tagged in the same slanted blue handwriting, Adric Volpe. Born June 1961, died June 1961. Kept at his mother's request. She stopped over that one. She read it twice. She could not touch it. She kept walking. There were tags everywhere. Tags on wrapped bundles. Tags on framed photographs. Tags on small wooden crates. Every one of them had a name, a date, a city, a note. Some of the notes were only a few words. Some of them ran 2 or 3 lines in the same careful blue ink. A cracked porcelain shepherdess, property of Winifred Kastner, dropped by movers in 1974, repaired by hand, awaiting her granddaughter. A packet of letters tied with a blue ribbon, from Meade Cortland to his fiancée Ivy Talbot, 1959. Merchant Marine, ship lost off Newfoundland, letters returned to sender, held for Ivy, then for her sister, then for her sister's daughter. A pocket watch on a bit of navy cloth, owned by Rufus Den Hollander, given to his son on the son's wedding day. Lost in a house fire, recovered by neighbors from the ashes, held 16 years for the son's daughter who has not yet come to ask. Rosemary read 4 of them, then 5. Then she had to stop, because a very small, awful thought had begun to form. Somebody had cared this much about strangers. Somebody had labeled a set of baby shoes, held them, kept them dry, for 60 years, so that a person he had never met could someday walk down these stairs and hold what was left of a brother. That somebody had been her grandfather, and that same somebody had spent 22 years looking for her. Rosemary sat down on the concrete floor for a moment. She did not know why. Then she stood up, and she kept walking. She reached the far corner. She knelt down in front of the thing that was pointed at the wall. And now that she was close, she could see what it was. An old projector, 16 millimeter. The kind she had seen once in a museum in 4th grade. Hand-cranked, mounted on a small folding table. A reel of film already loaded onto it. The projector was clean. Everything else down here was covered in a very fine layer of dust. The kind of dust that gathers when the air itself hardly moves. But not the projector. The projector had been wiped down. Recently. Prepared. Waiting. She picked up the envelope. She turned it in her hands. The paper was cream-colored. Thick. The kind of paper you buy on purpose. The kind you use for things that matter. She opened it. Inside was a single sheet folded once. She unfolded it. There were only 2 sentences. If you found this, please play it. It is the only way I know how to say the things I never got to say. And then smaller, as if he had added it after everything else was already written. I am sorry it took me so long to find you. Sweetheart. The word landed inside her like a stone dropped into a pond that had been frozen over for years. Sweetheart. She said it out loud, not to hear it, to feel it in her mouth. Nobody in her life had ever called her sweetheart the way it was written on that page. Not Sister Mildred, whose sweetheart had always meant I have bad news. Not Mrs. Hollister, who did not use pet names because they wasted breath. Not Marcel, who called every woman honey the same way she called every man sugar. This was different. This was directed. This was a word somebody had been carrying in his mouth for a long time, because he had been saving it. For her. She sat down on the concrete floor. She sat because her legs were done making decisions. She looked at the projector. She looked at the wall where the film would land. She could turn the crank right now. She could see his face. She could hear his voice. She could learn in the next 20 minutes everything he had spent 22 years trying to tell her. Or she could not. She could climb the stairs, close the blue door, drive back to Copperton, and live the rest of her life inside the small, safe story she had built. The story where nobody had ever come. The story where she had always been alone. She thought about that. She thought about it hard. Because a part of her, the part that had folded the butter yellow sweater at the bottom of a drawer for 13 years, was terrified. Terrified of hearing the voice. Terrified of knowing. Terrified that if she pressed her hand to that crank and let this old man talk to her, really talk to her, she would never again be able to survive her life the way she had survived it so far. Small, quiet, alone, certain that being unwanted was a fact instead of a wound. Because if he had wanted her the whole time, then the story she had been telling herself since she was 8 years old was not a story about the world. It was a story about a wall between her and the people who had been trying to reach her. And Rosemary did not know yet if she was strong enough to admit the wall had been there. Because if she admitted it, she would have to admit she had been loved. And she would have to grieve 22 years of not knowing. She sat on the floor in front of the projector. She put the note beside her. She reached up. She put her hand on the crank. She closed her eyes. She thought about the 8-year-old at the window. She thought, sweetheart. He was outside. She thought, sweetheart. He was outside the whole time. She opened her eyes. She turned the crank. The projector clicked. The reel began to spin. A soft mechanical hum filled the room. Light flickered on the wall. Static, static, static. And then a face. The face on the wall was old. That was the first thing she noticed. Not old the way she had pictured. Not old the way strangers were old. This was a specific old. This was a face that had waited. A face that had been shaped by waiting. Silver hair combed back. A little uneven. Like he had done it himself in a mirror without paying much attention. A gray flannel shirt. Reading glasses tucked into the pocket. He was sitting in the rocking chair. The rocking chair that was upstairs. The rocking chair Rosemary had been sitting in less than 2 hours ago. He looked at the camera. He looked at her. He smiled. It was not a big smile. It was the small kind. The kind people use when they are trying very hard not to cry. Hello, Rosemary. 2 words, but she folded forward on the floor of the hidden room, as if he had reached through the wall and put his hand on her hair. Because nobody had ever said her name like that. Ever. She had heard Rosemary barked across a farmhouse kitchen. She had heard Rosemary called from behind the diner counter. She had heard it stamped on paperwork. Filed. Alphabetized. Repeated flat like a form. She had heard it said with a sigh. With impatience. With the polite neutrality of strangers. She had never heard it said like it belonged to somebody. Like she belonged to somebody. He said it like her name was something he had been carrying in his pocket for a very long time. And now, finally, he could set it down. She pressed her hand against her mouth. She whispered a small hi, because whispering felt safer. He looked away from the camera for a moment, down at his hands. His hands were folded in his lap, big knuckles, the skin thin, the hands of a man who had built things once, who had fixed engines, who had repaired docks, who had held babies. He confessed with a soft, embarrassed laugh that he did not know how to start this, that he had been practicing it in his head for 22 years. And when you finally sat down to say a thing like this, nothing came out right. He took a breath. He looked back at the lens. His name was Ansel Ellsworth. If she was watching this, then he had run out of time. He was sorry, honey. He had really thought he would get to say all this in person. Rosemary closed her eyes, then opened them, because she could not stand to not see him. Because he was here. He was here. He was in this room right now in flickering light in 16 millimeter, in the small hum of a projector. Not a photograph, not paperwork, not a legal notice. A grandfather, talking to her. He told her about her mother first. Her mother had been small. She had been small her whole life. She had weighed 6 pounds 2 ounces when she was born. And her mother, Rosemary's grandmother, had said she was going to be a little bird. Not a whole eagle, just a small bird. A quick one. Ansel smiled at the memory. That was why they had picked her name. He tilted his head slightly. Rosemary. It had been his own grandmother's name. She had kept a garden in the front yard that people from 3 counties would drive to see. She had a saying she used with him when he was a boy, that if you planted something on purpose, it would find its way, even in bad soil, especially in bad soil. He had thought about that sentence a lot over the last 22 years, honey. Rosemary was very still. She thought about the hardware store rosemary plant. She thought about the 6 bushy plants on the back wall of the greenhouse. She thought about her hands still faintly smelling of the leaves. She had not just been named after a woman with a garden. She had been named into a family that had grown one particular thing for 4 generations. And she had, without knowing why, reached for that same plant on a shelf of clearance herbs 2 winters ago. The soil had been bad. The plant had found its way. He talked about her mother for a long time, about the small, quiet daughter he had raised, Marisol. Everybody had called her Soul, because when she came into a room, the room got warmer. She had been quiet her whole life. She had read too much. She had been afraid of thunderstorms. She had sat on the dock outside the floating house when she was little and thrown bread crusts at the ducks. She had always thrown too much. She could not stand the idea that one duck might get less than the others. She had come back inside with her hands sticky. Ansel smiled at that. Marisol had loved chamomile tea with honey, never sugar. She had said sugar was for people in a hurry. She had been going to be a teacher, 3rd grade, because she remembered her own 3rd grade teacher, a woman named Mrs. Threadgill, who had told Marisol in a very quiet classroom one afternoon that Marisol was the kind of child the world would be lucky to have grown up. Marisol had never forgotten that. Children never forgot being seen, he told the camera. His voice cracked. Just for a second. Then he steadied it. Marisol had gotten sick when Rosemary was 3. Nobody had known. It was her heart. It had been a problem her whole life. She had been born with a small hole in it. Everyone had thought it had closed on its own. Everyone had thought she was fine. She had not been fine. She had been pregnant with Rosemary when the first symptoms came. She had hidden them because she had wanted Rosemary. She had wanted her more than she had wanted her own safety. She had kept saying, "This baby is a prayer that got answered. I am not losing this baby." So she had carried her, and she had her, and she had loved her for 4 years. Every one of those 4 years, Ansel said, like she had known she was borrowing time, because she had been. Rosemary put her forehead down against her knees. She was rocking again. She was not doing it on purpose. Something in her chest was making a small, awful sound. She had never heard herself make that sound before. She thought I was loved. She thought for 4 years, someone loved me, before I knew what love was, before I knew there was a word for it. She thought, and I don't remember any of it. That was the part that hurt worst, that she could not remember, that the woman on the wall who had loved her, the small woman with the tired heart and the too many bread crusts, was someone Rosemary had held and been held by. And Rosemary had absolutely no memory of her. Not one. Not a smell, not a song, not a hand on her forehead, not a lullaby at bedtime, not a face leaning over a crib in the dark. She had spent 21 years thinking there was nothing to remember. There had been. She just had not been old enough to keep it. Marisol had died in the spring, Ansel went on. April. Rosemary had been 4, almost 4.5. She had been staying with a neighbor that afternoon, making cookies with the neighbor's kids in the kitchen. Ansel had called the neighbor twice from the hospital. He had never gotten there in time to tell Rosemary over the phone. Rosemary's grandmother had. Her grandmother had sat with her at the kitchen table and told her. And her grandmother had said Rosemary did not cry, that Rosemary had just gone very still. Ansel smiled sadly at the memory. She had always gone very still, honey. When she had been scared, he had remembered that. She had been the quietest scared child he had ever seen. Rosemary let out a small choked breath. Because she still did that. She still did that even now. When something in her life got bad, she went very still. It was how Mrs. Hollister had thought she was calm. It was how Marcel had thought she was strong. It was how Sister Mildred had thought she was easy. She had never been calm. She had been going still, because that was what she did. When the world was too much, when there was nowhere to put the feeling. She had been doing that since she was 4 years old at a kitchen table, being told her mother was gone. A 4-year-old at a kitchen table. A 4-year-old who did the same thing then. Ansel took a breath. He announced plainly that this was where he had made a mistake. He wanted to tell her what had happened, because he owed her the truth. After her mother had died, he had not been in his right mind. He wanted her to know that, not as an excuse, as a fact. Grief had made him stupid. Grief had made him slow. He had let people around him handle things he should have handled himself. Her father had been gone. He looked at the camera very steadily. He wanted to be careful how he talked about the man. He had never met her father. Marisol had met him at a bookstore in a town Ansel had never been to. She had loved him for 11 months. He had left before Rosemary had been born. He had not left a forwarding address. He had not left his name on the birth certificate. He had not left anything. That was not judgment. That was just what had happened. Marisol had not put Ansel's name on the birth certificate either, because her father and mother had still been alive. And she had assumed that of course Rosemary would end up with them. She had assumed they would raise her. She had told Ansel so in the hospital. She had held his hand. She had said, "Daddy, take care of her." And he had said, "Of course, of course, of course." He looked down at his hands. He had broken that promise. Rosemary's stomach turned over. She whispered no, because she had already been holding him in her mind as the one person in the story who had done everything right. She had needed him to be that. She had been failed enough. She said out loud into the empty room that she was begging him not to tell her he had failed her. Ansel on the wall kept going, because he had recorded this without knowing she would say that, because he was already telling her. When Marisol had died, her father's side of the family had surfaced. Ansel had not heard from them in years. Rosemary's father had a distant cousin, a woman named Ophelia Blackwood. She had been in her 40s. She had lived 2 states over. She had come to the funeral. She had said she wanted to help. She had said she would take Rosemary for a few weeks, just while everybody grieved, just while everybody caught their breath. Ansel's wife, Rosemary's grandmother, had just been diagnosed with cancer that same month. Nobody had told Rosemary. She had been 4, but her grandmother Ansel's Odette had been very sick. She had been going into treatment. And Ansel had been scared, honey. He had been scared out of his mind, because he had been about to lose 2 women in 1 year. So he had said yes to Ophelia. He had said just a few weeks, just until Odette was stronger. That had been his mistake. Odette had died in August, 4 months after Marisol. She just could not fight it. She had been too tired and too sad. She had kept asking about the baby at the end. She had kept saying, "Where is the baby? Where is the baby? Bring me the baby." And Ansel had called Ophelia over and over, and Ophelia had stopped answering. And then Ophelia's number had stopped working. And then Ophelia had moved. By the time he had found out where she had gone, she had signed Rosemary over to the state. She had never had legal custody, but she had had physical custody, and she had told a caseworker that she was overwhelmed, that she could not do it, that there was no other family. His voice went very quiet. She had erased him. She had told them Marisol's father was dead. She had told them the grandmother was dead. She had told them there was no one. Rosemary was gripping her elbows so hard it hurt. She whispered, "Why?" Ansel said, as if answering, he did not know why. He truly did not. Money, maybe. Overwhelm. Guilt. Fear. He did not know. He had spent 22 years trying to make peace with not knowing. Some people, just some people, made small, quiet decisions that ruined other people's lives, and they did not even see themselves doing it. He was quiet for a moment. The projector hummed. Rosemary's hands were cold. By the time he had found her the first time, honey, she had been 8 years old. Her breath caught. It had taken him almost 4 years, because Ophelia had put her into the system under a slightly different last name. She had used Rosemary's father's mother's maiden name, not Ellsworth. So when he had called around, nobody had a Rosemary Ellsworth, because there had not been one on paper. He had found her through a records clerk in a county office, 300 miles from here. A woman named Norwin. God bless Norwin. She had found a small clerical mismatch in a file. She had called him. She had told him she thought this was his granddaughter. He had gotten in his truck at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and he had driven all night. He had driven straight to St. Bernice. Rosemary put her hands flat against the concrete floor to steady herself, because she knew what was coming, because she had lived what was coming. It had been November. It had been cold. There had been a little snow that morning. He had gotten there. He had gotten to St. Bernice at about 11 o'clock in the morning. He had walked up to the front door. He stopped. He rubbed his eyes. He apologized in advance. He was going to have to tell her this next part slowly. He did not want to hurt her, but she needed to know. Rosemary said into the room, into the flickering light, even though he could not hear her tell me. The woman at the front desk had been a nun. She had been polite. She had listened to him. He had told her who he was. He had told her he had a granddaughter there. He had told her his daughter had died. He had told her there had been a family mix-up. He had told her he had driven all night. She had been kind. She really had. She had told him, let me check. She had gone in the back for a long time. And when she had come out, she had had another woman with her. That woman had been the state caseworker assigned to Rosemary's file. The caseworker had explained to him patiently that according to the records, he had no legal claim on this child, that his name was not on her birth certificate, that his name was not on any of her paperwork, that the person who had surrendered her to the state had told them there was no living family, that they had no independent verification that he was related to her at all, that they could not allow him to see her that day. I had begged. He had pictures. He had documents. He had his daughter's birth certificate. He had asked them to look at him, to look at his face, to see that she was his granddaughter. The caseworker had said, sir, I understand this is upsetting, but we have to protect the child. We cannot let strangers make claims and then walk out with a little girl. Even if your story is true, we need a court order. We need paperwork. We need time. He had said, I have driven all night. She had said, I know, sir. I am sorry. He looked down. He had stood outside on the front walk for a long time after that. He had not known what to do. He could not just leave. So he had walked around the side of the building. There had been a parlor window on the north side, and the lace curtains had been pulled back. And he had looked in, and there she had been. Rosemary let out a sound, a small one, something between a breath and a word. She could not tell which. She had been sitting on the window seat, in a yellow sweater. Her feet had been tucked underneath her. She had been watching the driveway. She had not seen him. She had not turned. She had had her hands folded in her lap. She had been so small, honey. She had been so small and so still. And she had been watching that driveway like her whole life was going to arrive down it. He had stood outside that window for maybe 2 minutes, maybe 3. He did not know. He had had a camera in his truck. He had gone back and gotten it. He had come back. He had taken one picture because he had needed proof, not for the court, for himself. He had needed proof he had seen her, because if he had lost the fight, if he had never gotten her back, he had needed to be able to look at that picture for the rest of his life and know that he had at least seen her once. Then he had gotten in his truck, and he had driven home, and he had started fighting. Rosemary was crying. She was not sobbing. She was leaking. Tears were just running down her face and off her chin. Slow, steady, under the collar of her sweater. She was not wiping them away. She was not doing anything. Because she was 8 years old again, in that window seat, in that sweater. And now she knew. Now she knew. He had been outside. He had been outside the whole time. While she had thought no one on earth was coming for her, there had been an old man in a truck, 3 feet away, on the other side of the glass, taking her picture through lace curtains, so he could love her from a distance he had not been given permission to close. She had not been alone. She had never been alone. She had only been on the wrong side of the wall. Ansel talked for a long time about the years after. I had sued in the spring after that November. He had sued for grandparent rights. He had sued for custody. He had sued for visitation. He had sued for anything, honey, anything he could get. It had taken 6 years. He had lost the first two. He had appealed. He had lost again. He had hired a new lawyer. He had lost. He had hired another one. 6 Novembers had passed while he had fought. He had finally gotten a court to acknowledge that he was her biological grandfather. That had been a partial victory. It had meant he existed. It had meant on paper that he was her family. But by then, she had been 15. And by then, she had already been in the process of being placed with a foster family. A couple named Hollister, out on a farm. Rosemary flinched, actually flinched, hearing the name from him, hearing him say Hollister in his voice. He had fought that placement. He had fought it for 3 more years. He had asked for visitation. He had asked to write to her. He had asked to send her a birthday card. He had asked to send her a package at Christmas. Every request had been denied. Every one. Because the state had said that a stable placement was in her best interest. And any contact from an outside relative would confuse her, would upset her, would destabilize her. He had, once he confessed, driven up to the Hollister farm without permission. He had known the address. He had rolled down his window at the end of the driveway. He had seen a girl in the yard hanging sheets. He had watched for maybe 15 seconds. Then a woman had come out on the porch and yelled at the girl, and he had driven away, because he could not bear to be the reason that yelling got worse. Rosemary sat very still. She remembered a blue truck at the end of a driveway. She remembered the small animal lifting its head inside her chest. She had not imagined it. She had not imagined it. Ansel kept going. He had fought for her every year, every single year, not because he wanted credit, but because he did not want her to spend one more day of her life thinking nobody was fighting. 2 winters ago, he had finally gotten visitation rights. He had called the Hollister house. Mrs. Hollister had told him that Rosemary had left the year before, at 18, in the middle of the night, without a note. Mrs. Hollister had told him that she did not know where the girl had gone, and that frankly, she did not much care. Rosemary put her fist against her mouth. She said out loud into the room that she had not known. She said it 3 times quieter each time, and then she stopped. Because the next word had been, I would have. And she did not know what she would have done. She did not know what she was capable of at 18. If a phone call had come, and someone had said, I am your grandfather, and I love you, and I have been looking for you for 10 years. She did not know if she would have believed it. That was the part that scared her. That was the part that scared her worst. That maybe she would not have believed him, because by 18 she had already learned that the people who said they were coming back did not come back. Ever. Ansel took a breath. He had hired a private investigator. It had taken the man almost a year to find her. A year of small towns. A year of dead ends. The investigator had tracked her through gas station receipts, through a bounced check at a laundromat, through a call to an old landlord. He had found her 2 summers ago at Halstead's Diner in Copperton. 6 to 2 shift. The investigator had come back and told him. He had given him the address. He had given him a photograph. He had taken it from across the street through the diner window. She had been pouring coffee. She had had her hair up. She had been laughing at something a customer had said. That had been the second picture of her Ansel had ever had, honey. He had looked at it for a very long time. I had been going to come see her. He had had it planned. He had been going to drive down. He had been going to sit at a booth. He had been going to order coffee. He had been going to wait until she had not been too busy. He had been going to say, "Excuse me, miss, do you have a minute?" He had been practicing. Then he had gotten sick. It had been fast. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4 when they had found it. The doctors had given him 12 months. They had been generous. It had been 10. And he had sat down at that kitchen table. The one Rosemary had seen upstairs when she came in. The one where he had left the mug. He had sat down at that table. And he had thought about what to do. And he had decided. He had decided he could not come see her. Rosemary made a small hurt sound. He kept going. He knew that sounded crazy. He knew it sounded like he had given up. But honey, he needed her to hear him. Please hear him. He had thought about it for weeks. He had thought about walking into that diner. He had thought about telling her who he was. He had thought about what would happen next. He had seen it. He had seen the whole thing. He had seen himself say, "I am your grandfather." He had seen her face change. He had seen her decide whether to believe him. He had seen her slowly, start to believe him, because he would have made her believe him. He had the pictures. He had the paperwork. He had everything. And then he had seen the next part. He had seen the two of them have 4 months together, maybe 5. He had seen her starting to trust him. He had seen her starting to hope. He had seen her starting to think, maybe I have a family. Maybe this is where I belong. Maybe I have somewhere to go for Christmas. And then he had seen himself die. And he had seen her burying him. And he had seen her sitting alone at his funeral. And he had thought Rosemary Ellsworth had been abandoned enough times in her life. She had been left by her father. She had been left by her mother, though her mother had not chosen it. She had been left by a cousin she should have been able to trust. She had been left by a couple in a butter yellow sweater who had promised to come back at Christmas. She had been left by a system. She did not need to be left by him too. So he had made a different plan. He looked directly into the camera. He had put everything in order. He had put every letter he had ever written her in a cedar chest. He had put every photograph he had of her mother. He had put every photograph he had of her grandmother. And he had put his own history, his mother's history, his grandmother's rosemary garden. He had asked the lawyer to wait until he was gone. He had asked him to tell her then, because he could not be a person she had to lose. He could only be a person she got to find. Rosemary put her hands over her face, because she understood. She understood what he had done. She understood that he had spent his last months choosing to be findable, instead of choosing to be present, because he had known, this old man had known, that finding him after he was gone would hurt her less than finding him and losing him. He had loved her enough to withhold himself from her. I had loved her enough to save her from the version of grief he had already lived through, with her mother, with her grandmother, with his own daughter. He had made a small, quiet decision to disappear again, for the last time, so that when she found him, she could find him whole, preserved, in cassette tapes and letters, in a floating house, in a hidden room, behind a small blue door, not a body in a hospital bed, a grandfather in a rocking chair, sitting exactly where she was sitting, talking to her, exactly like he was doing right now. She was going to grieve him. She was going to grieve him for the rest of her life. But she would grieve him as someone she had found, not someone she had lost. He had given her that. He had spent his last months giving her that. He spoke softly again. He directed her to a cedar chest in the corner of the small upstairs bedroom, behind the quilt. It had her name on it. He had been writing her a letter every birthday since he had found out she existed. He wanted her to read them slowly, honey. One a day, or one a week. Don't rush. There were 22 of them. They were hers. There was also under the third floorboard by the kitchen sink a small envelope. He asked her not to open it yet, to open it when she was ready. She would know when she was ready. Trust him. There was more here than he had time to explain, and there were people who would come. Some would be kind. 1 or 2 might not be. But he wanted her to know something. Whatever this house asked of her, she could say no. She did not owe any of this to him. She did not owe anything to him. He had not found her so he could hand her a job. He had found her so she would know she had been found. He smiled the small, kind smile again. 22 years he had looked honey. 22 years. And every one of them, every single one, he promised her. She had not been alone. He loved her. He would see her around. He reached forward. He turned off the camera. The film flickered. The image went to static. The reel spun to its end and clicked softly and stopped. The room went dark. Only the projector's small green pilot light remained. Steady, small, like a boat on the far side of a lake. Rosemary did not move. She could not have moved if the house was on fire. She sat on the floor in front of the wall, with her arms wrapped around her knees, and her face wet, and her chest making the small, awful sound again. And she said it out loud. To no one. To him. To the small green light. I love you too. She stayed down in that room a long time after that, long enough that she lost her sense of time. At some point, she reached for the note again. Read it again. Traced the word sweetheart with her finger. At some point, she went to a smaller cedar chest tucked against the north wall. She had not noticed the first time. She lifted the lid. Inside, a stack of envelopes tied with string. 22 of them. She did not open them. Not yet. She could feel him inside them. Waiting. Patient. The way he had been patient for 22 years already. He could wait a few more days for her to be ready. She climbed the stairs. She closed the small blue door behind her. She pushed the bookshelf back into place. She walked slowly through the rooms of the floating house, the rooms of the man who had loved her from too far away. She stopped at the kitchen. The mug was still there. She picked it up. She carried it to the sink. She stood at the sink for a full minute. Then she set the mug down without washing it. She put it back exactly where she had found it. She could not wash it yet, because he had set it down, because he had meant to come back, because the mug had been waiting for him, and she was not ready to be the one who told the mug he was not coming back. She walked out onto the front porch of the floating house. The lake was silver. The mist had lifted. The sun was low behind a bank of pale clouds. A single loon called somewhere across the water. A long, lonely sound. The sound of a thing that knew what it was. She stood there. She breathed. She thought, I have a mother named Marisol who threw too much bread at ducks. She thought, I have a grandmother named Odette who asked for me at the end. She thought, I have a grandfather who stood outside a window in November and took my picture through lace curtains, and who came back 4 years later to the end of a Hollister driveway just to watch me hang sheets. She thought, I am not who I thought I was, which was terrifying, and which was also, for the first time in her life, a door swinging open in a direction that led out, instead of in. She did not hear the sedan at first. The engine was too far up the hill, and the sound of the lake was loud in her ears. But then she heard the tires on gravel. She turned. At the top of the hill, parked next to the Buick, was a black sedan she had never seen before. 2 people were getting out. A woman in her 40s, sharp coat, sharp haircut, sharp shoes that were not made for a gravel road, and a man in a gray suit, holding a leather folder against his chest. The woman was already walking down the hill toward the dock. She was walking fast, the way people walk when they think you might close a door in their face if they do not get to it in time. Rosemary took 1 step back on the porch. The woman was closer now, close enough for Rosemary to see her face. Something about the shape of the jaw, something about the way she held her mouth. The woman stopped at the bottom of the hill, on the grass, just short of the dock. She smiled a small, polite smile that did not reach her eyes. She introduced herself as Corva Blackwood. She said they had some family business to discuss. Rosemary stood on the porch of the floating house. She did not step forward. She did not step back. She just stood, because a woman she had never seen was walking down the hill toward her with a name that was already sitting inside Rosemary's chest like a bruise. Blackwood. Ophelia Blackwood. the distant cousin who had signed her over. The name Ansel had said in the film only 20 minutes ago, the name that had erased him. And now a woman was standing at the edge of her dock, in a coat that cost more than a month at Halstead's, smiling a small, polite smile that did not reach her eyes, saying that she was Corva Blackwood, saying that they had some family business to discuss. Family. Rosemary had a lot of feelings about that word, none of them small. The man in the gray suit stayed at the top of the hill. He was not looking at Rosemary. He was looking at the house, walking a slow half circle around the Buick, snapping pictures of the roof, the greenhouse, the copper bell at the peak, framing shots with his hands, like a man measuring a room for furniture that had not yet been ordered. Corva took a small step onto the dock. The boards creaked. She stopped when they did, because the boards creaked in a specific old way, like a house that had noticed her. Corva looked down at her feet, at her sharp shoes. She lifted one heel off the wood. Then she looked up. She told Rosemary that she understood this was a lot, that she had lost her mother recently too. Rosemary blinked, because whatever she had expected, it had not been that. The apology came out of her mouth before she thought about it. On old training, on years of yes ma'am, on years of thank you 3 times, on years of a girl who had been raised to be polite to women who did not deserve politeness. Corva took a second step. The boards creaked again. She clarified that her own mother was still alive, but not with her anymore. Advanced Alzheimer's. Had not known who she was in almost a year. Rosemary did not answer, because the last woman who had walked toward her with that specific soft face and that specific soft voice had been Sister Mildred. And Sister Mildred had walked toward her to say something that had broken open her life. She did not want another one of those. Corva held out a business card. She was still on the third board. Rosemary did not take the card, so Corva set it down on the dock, very gently, like a woman leaving a peace offering at a border she had not been invited to cross. Blackwood and Whitfield, Legacy Holdings. Corva said the name like it had a certificate hanging on a wall somewhere. She began again gentler. She said she understood Rosemary had not known her grandfather. Rosemary made a small sound, not a word. A sound, like a knuckle knocking on a door somebody had already locked. The words came out before Rosemary could stop them. That she had not known him, no, but he had known her. He had had a name and a face and a mouth. He had had a rocking chair. He had had reading glasses. He had had a coffee mug on a kitchen table upstairs that she had not washed. And Corva was not to tell her what she had known. Corva's face did not change, but something behind her eyes did. She had been trained not to react. She had been trained by rooms with long tables and men in suits with folders. She had been trained by phone calls to hospitals and phone calls from lawyers and phone calls where somebody had cried on the other end, and she had been the one who did not cry. She had been trained to stay smooth, but the small thing behind her eyes was not smooth. The small thing behind her eyes was tired. Rosemary noted it. She did not know what to do with it yet, but she noted it. Corva took one more step. She asked carefully if she could call Rosemary by her first name. Rosemary set her name back at her the way you set a lit match on a countertop to see what will burn. She told Corva that Corva could not call her by anything until she said what she wanted. Corva's mouth twitched. Not a smile. Almost. Fair. She took a breath. She explained. The lake was being sold to a resort group. The paperwork was already in motion. The county board had approved a rezoning last month. This property, this house, this land was part of that sale. There were 30 days. At the top of the hill, the man in the gray suit lowered his camera. He was watching them now, watching Rosemary, watching Corva. 30 days for what Rosemary asked, for her to decide whether to sign. Corva reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a folded piece of paper, held it out. $75,000. Rosemary would give them the house, the land, the right to move on, and she would walk away with more money than most people in Copperton saw in 5 years. Corva added dryly that she knew what a diner waitress made. The number sat in the air between them. 75,000. Rosemary had $47 in her wallet. 47. She had counted it that morning at the sink of the little bathroom above the auto shop. She had counted it because she counted it every morning. She had counted it because a woman who had grown up with nothing counted her money the way other women brushed their hair. $47. She could feel every bill. The two 20s, the five, the two ones, the paper of them soft from 1,000 small foldings. She thought I could not afford to say no to this. She thought I am supposed to say yes. She thought a smart woman would say yes. She thought a smart woman would take the money and run and buy a small house somewhere far away and plant a garden and never think about a floating house on a lake called Lantern again. And then she thought about a coffee mug. She thought about a butter yellow sweater at the bottom of a drawer. She thought about a small brass key with a paper tag that said, "For Rosemary, when you come." Not if, when. She thought about a small pair of baby shoes downstairs, tissue paper, a tag, a brother who had not made it out of June. She looked past Corva, at the man in the gray suit at the top of the hill, who was watching, who had lowered his camera, whose polished shoes were dusty at the toes because he had not planned to have to stand in gravel for this long. She asked Corva who he was. Preston Whitfield. He handled the development side. Development side. She said it the way you say the name of an illness. Corva did not flinch, but her eyes moved. Down, to the folded paper in her hand, and then back up. She told Rosemary that she had 30 days, that if Rosemary signed in the next week, they could wire the money by Friday. Rosemary took one step off the porch. She walked out onto the dock. She stopped in front of Corva. She was a full head shorter than Corva was in those sharp shoes. She was in her butter yellow sweater and jeans and boots that had seen a diner floor for 4 years. She had not slept the night before. She had cried on a concrete floor in a hidden room until her eyes burned. She should have looked small. She did not look small. She began quietly. Her voice was low, steady, not angry, just certain in a way she had never been certain of anything. She did not know Corva. She did not know what Corva's mother had done to her grandfather. She did not know why Corva and the man at the top of the hill had driven up here on the same day she had first walked into this house, which was a thing she would like to think about later, because it was a strange coincidence, and she did not much believe in coincidences anymore. She needed Corva to know something, that the money was a very small amount of money. Corva's chin lifted. Rosemary kept going, not because $75,000 was small, because it was not. To her, it was more money than she had ever seen in her life. But because Corva was not just buying a house, she was buying the silence of a man who had spent 22 years trying to reach her. And she was buying Rosemary's silence too. And she was buying the silence of everyone whose letters and photographs and baby shoes were sitting in this house right now waiting to go home. That was not a house sale. That was a purchase order for a whole community's grief. And they did not have enough money for that. Nobody did. Corva did not answer. The wind moved across the lake behind them. Preston Whitfield began to walk down the hill. Rosemary held out her hand, not to shake, to take back the piece of paper Corva was holding. Corva looked at her hand. Corva did something Rosemary did not expect. She put the paper into Rosemary's hand, softly, like a woman handing over a thing she had not fully believed in when she carried it. Corva asked her quieter now to please take a few days. Please, it was not personal. Rosemary looked up at her. She told her gently that she knew it was not personal, that was the problem. The wind moved again. Preston Whitfield reached the bottom of the hill. He said something to Corva, something about the site plan, something about the timeline, something about a phone call at 3. Corva did not answer him. Corva turned and walked back up the hill. She walked without the fast walk, without the sharp walk, without the walk of a woman who had spent her whole professional life making the boards under other people's feet creak. She walked like a woman who had been told a thing she was going to have to hold for a while. Preston Whitfield stayed a moment longer. He looked at Rosemary. He called it a win-win opportunity for both parties and said he hoped she would reconsider. Rosemary did not say anything, because Ansel had told her in the flickering light of a projector 3 feet under her boots, she could say no. She did not owe anybody a yes. Preston Whitfield's mouth tightened. He got the message. He turned, walked up the hill, got into the sedan, slammed the door harder than a grown man should. The sedan pulled away. The gravel spit under the tires. Then it was quiet again. The lake was silver. The loon called somewhere far out on the water. The single lonely sound of a thing that knew what it was. Rosemary stood on the dock. She held the folded paper in her hand. She did not open it. She did not need to. She tore it once. She tore it twice. She tore it into small pieces and let the wind take them off the lake. They fluttered like a small white flock of birds against the gray water. And then they were gone. She walked back into the house. She sat down at the kitchen table, across from the coffee mug. She spoke to him aloud in the quiet kitchen. She had said no, Grandpa. She had said no. She sat with the mug a long time. Then she got up. She had one thing left to do. She had a floorboard to lift. Under the third floorboard by the kitchen sink. She got down on her knees. She was still shaking a little from what had just happened on the dock, from what had happened in the room below, from the fact that in the space of one Tuesday, she had gone from a woman with $47 in her wallet to a woman who had just torn up $75,000. She used a butter knife from the drawer to lift the board. It came up easy, like it had been lifted before, like the man who had put it back down had known the day would come when somebody would need to lift it again. Underneath was a small tin box, rectangular, red, chipped at the corners, the kind of tin that used to hold peppermint candies in a grocery store checkout aisle, old enough that the paint on the lid had faded to pink. Rosemary lifted it out. She sat on the kitchen floor with the tin in her lap. She opened it. Inside was a single cassette tape, just one. The label was handwritten. She knew the handwriting because she had read enough of Ansel's script by now to know the difference. This was not his hand. This was younger, rounder, a woman's letters, careful. The kind of careful you use when you are writing something for a person you have not met yet. The label said, "For my daughter, Rosemary, June." Rosemary put her hand over the label, just to feel the pen strokes underneath her fingers, just to feel her mother's hand. Underneath the tape, folded into a small square, was a note, in Ansel's writing. She unfolded it. "Honey, your mother made this tape 2 months before you were born. She did not know she was going to die. Nobody did. She made it because she was a woman who wrote small things down, because she was a woman who trusted the future with what she had to say. She gave it to me to hold. She said, 'Daddy, put this somewhere safe so that if I get too busy being a mother, I can play it for her someday.' And remember what I was thinking. Before she came, she did not get to play it for you. I have never played it. Not once. It is exactly as she left it. I did not want to be the first person to hear her voice again after she was gone. I wanted that voice to be waiting. For you. Play it when you are ready. Then play it as many times as you need to. I love you, Rosemary. Grandpa Ansel." Rosemary sat on the kitchen floor. She did not move. She thought about every version of herself who had ever been left behind. She thought, "Come sit with me. You get to hear this too." She went into the reading room. There was an old cassette player on the second shelf. She had noticed it that morning. She had wondered then why it was there. She understood now. He had left it for her. He had left everything for her. She brought the cassette player into the kitchen. She set it on the small kitchen table across from the coffee mug. She put the tape in. She sat down. She pressed play. For a long moment there was only static. Then a small warm laugh. A laugh at nothing. Just the sound of a young woman getting comfortable in a chair. Then her voice. "Okay, Okay, so, hi, this is really strange. I feel really strange. A pause. Another laugh. Daddy told me to just talk to you. He said, pretend she is right here. Pretend she can hear you. So I am going to do that. I am going to talk to you like you are right here. A pause. Hi. Honey, it is me. It is your mama. Rosemary put both hands over her mouth. Her mother's voice. Her mother's voice was young. That was the first thing. Her mother had been young. Rosemary had spent her whole life imagining her mother as a picture, a photograph, someone frozen. But this was a woman, in a room, in a chair, 24 years old, pregnant, a little tired, a little nervous, laughing at herself for talking into a machine. Her mother's voice was warm. That was the second thing. Her mother's voice was warm and low and a little rough at the edges. It was the voice of a woman who sang in kitchens. Who would have called out for you across a parking lot? Who would have said, come here, come here, come here, and meant it? Rosemary closed her eyes. She listened. Marisol Ellsworth talked into the kitchen of a floating house on Lantern Lake across 22 years, and she talked to Rosemary like Rosemary was in the next room. She talked about the nursery. She talked about the color she had painted the walls. She talked about the crib Ansel had built by hand. She talked about the fact that she had been knitting a sweater, that she had been knitting it for months, that she was not a good knitter, that she had ripped it out and started over 4 times, that she was going to finish it before the baby came, that the sweater was going to be butter yellow, because she loved butter yellow, because it was the color of the light in the kitchen at 6 o'clock in the morning in October, and she wanted her daughter to grow up wrapped in warm morning light. Rosemary put her hand on her chest. She could not breathe, because the sweater at the bottom of a drawer, the sweater she had put on that morning to drive up here, the sweater she was wearing right now on a kitchen floor in a house that was not supposed to be hers, butter yellow. Her mother had picked the color before she had picked her. Her mother had loved the color of butter yellow morning light before Rosemary had ever seen morning light. Marisol spoke to her on the tape about the kind of woman she hoped Rosemary would grow up to be. She hoped Rosemary would be braver than she was, louder than she was. She hoped Rosemary would take up all the space she wanted and never ever apologize for it. Rosemary let out a small sound because she had spent her whole life apologizing for taking up space, because a woman she had never met had been asking her not to, from 22 years away. Marisol went on. She hoped Rosemary knew that she was not a mistake, that a lot of babies got told that they were a happy accident, and Rosemary was not that. She was a prayer that got answered. Marisol had prayed for her for 4 years. Rosemary's father had prayed with her for the first year, and then he had gotten scared, and Marisol had kept praying. She had kept praying by herself. And then one morning she had woken up and known Rosemary was coming, and she had sat on the edge of the bed and cried, because Rosemary had heard her. Rosemary had heard her the whole time. Marisol did not know what Rosemary's life was going to look like. She hoped it was soft. She hoped people were kind to her. She hoped somebody told her good night. She hoped somebody made her breakfast. She hoped somebody held her hand at the movies. She hoped Rosemary had a friend who called her at midnight for no reason. She hoped Rosemary had a dog. She hoped Rosemary had a garden. She hoped Rosemary had a window that faced the sun. She hoped Rosemary had a place, honey, a place that was hers. Rosemary was crying, not sobbing, not shaking, just full crying, steady, steady, like a tap that had been left on for 21 years and had finally been noticed. Because a woman she had never met had wanted every single thing for her that she had never dared want for herself. Because a woman she had never met had known her long before anyone else had. Marisol asked her to listen carefully to this next part. If anything ever happened to her, and nothing was going to, but if it did, she wanted Rosemary to know something. She wanted Rosemary to know that she had been wanted. From the very beginning, Wanted before Marisol had seen her face, before Marisol had known her name, before Marisol had known whether she had 10 fingers and 10 toes. Wanted, wanted, wanted. There was no version of this world in which she had not been wanted. Marisol was quiet for a moment. Then softer, she said she was going to sing her something, a little song she had been making up. It did not have a name. She did not know if she would remember it later, so she was putting it here, so Rosemary could have it, in case. And then Marisol sang. She sang a lullaby, slow, simple, in a low voice, untitled, nothing anyone had ever heard before, nothing anyone else in the world had ever sung. It was for Rosemary, just for Rosemary. Rosemary sat at the kitchen table. She listened. She did not move. She did not cry. She was too full to cry. When Marisol finished the song, she laughed softly. She told Rosemary she loved her. She said she loved her already. She said she loved her more than anything she had ever loved in her life. She said she did not even have to meet her. She already knew. The tape clicked. The tape stopped. Rosemary sat at the kitchen table for a long, long time. Then she rewound the tape. She played it again. She played it again after that. She played it 4 times that first night. She fell asleep with her head on the kitchen table, and her mother's lullaby playing softly under her cheek. The next week, she did not go back to Copperton. She called Marcel. Marcel told her to take as long as she needed. She called Wilder. Wilder told her the Buick was a good car. It liked it up there. She should keep her. She started organizing. Slowly, room by room, trunk by trunk. She started building a ledger of everything in the hidden room. Every letter, every photograph, every bundle, every name, every city. She started to understand what her grandfather had built. He had not been a collector. He had not been a hoarder. He had not been a strange old man on a lake hoarding other people's grief. He had been a keeper. He had been the person in the community whom other people had trusted with the things they could not throw away and could not display. The letters they were afraid the fire would take. The photographs they were afraid the flood would claim. The wedding rings of the sons who had not come home. The baby shoes of the babies who had not grown up. He had sat with these things. He had kept them dry. He had kept them clean. He had kept them sorted. He had kept them in some cases for 50 years, so that when a granddaughter finally showed up looking for a grandmother's letter, the letter would be there. He had been keeping small pieces of other people's hearts, in a hidden room, under a floating house, on a quiet lake. And when he had realized his own heart was running out of time, he had gone looking for the person he loved most in the world, so the keeping could continue. Rosemary understood one afternoon in late June, sitting on the floor of the archive room, with a bundle of letters in her lap, that this was what he had left her, not a house, a calling. She did not know if she wanted it. She sat with that. She did not answer the question that day. She started reading his birthday letters that week, one a day, slowly. She underlined the small facts about her mother in pencil so she could find them again. The letter on her 7th birthday was about the rosemary garden. Her great-grandmother had once told Ansel when he had been a boy that the plant was called an herb of remembrance, that in old country churches, women had pinned sprigs of it to their coats at funerals, that the leaves held their smell for a very long time, even after they dried, that some plants were designed to help you not forget. Rosemary read that letter twice. She sat in the greenhouse afterward with a sprig of it between her fingers. Some plants were designed to help you not forget. She had reached for that plant on a hardware store shelf without knowing. Her body had known before her mind had. Her mother had known before both. She started walking to the nearest town twice a week for groceries, a small place called Havenwood, 7 miles down the road. The old woman at the general store was named Mrs. Marchbanks. She took one look at Rosemary the first time she came in, Ansel's granddaughter. Rosemary asked quietly how she knew. Mrs. Marchbanks explained that Ansel had told everyone in this town he was looking for her. Bless her heart, child. For 20 years, everyone in that town had known she was coming. They just had not known when. Rosemary stood at the register with a jar of peanut butter and a loaf of bread and cried in front of a stranger. Mrs. Marchbanks came around the counter and put her arms around her. "Welcome home, honey." He would have been so glad. The woman came on a Tuesday. Of course she did. Rosemary was on the dock, coffee in her hands, in a mug that had been Ansel's. She had finally washed it. She had thought, "This is my mug now," and she had almost laughed, because it was such a small, strange thing to think, and it had felt so enormous. That was when she saw the woman at the top of the hill. Not Corva, an older woman. Silver hair pulled back low at the nape of her neck, a canvas tote bag over one shoulder, a soft camel-colored coat. Even though the morning was not cold, the woman was just standing there, looking down at the house, not moving. Rosemary stood up on the dock. The woman raised a hand slowly, uncertain, half a wave. Rosemary walked up the dock, up the small path from the water, up the hill. When she got close enough to see the woman's face, she noticed two things. The woman had been crying recently. Not right now. Recently. Her eyes were the specific pink of somebody who had cried on the drive up, and the woman was holding a small photograph in her hand. Rosemary stopped a few feet away. The woman opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. She apologized for she stopped. She had read the obituary in the paper. She had not known if she should come. She had been sitting in a coffee shop in town for 2 hours trying to decide. The obituary for Ansel. She had known him. The woman looked at Rosemary's face for a long moment. Something shifted in her expression. Quickly, almost embarrassed, like she had been caught staring. "You have her mouth." Rosemary went cold. "Who?" she asked. "Souls." "Nobody called her that," Rosemary said. "The woman said she did." There was a long pause. The wind moved across the water behind them. A single small ripple. The sound of the lake meeting the dock. The far-off call of a loon. The woman introduced herself as Isabeau Latham. She had been Marisol's best friend from when they were 16 years old. She had been there when Rosemary was born. She had held her in the hospital. Marisol had made her promise something before she died. And Isabeau had been trying in various imperfect ways to keep that promise for 21 years. Rosemary did not move. Isabeau added quickly that she knew this was a lot. That she knew Rosemary did not know her. That she could leave. She would leave if that was what Rosemary needed. Rosemary asked what she had promised. Isabeau looked at the small photograph in her hand, then back at Rosemary. She said she had promised Marisol that if her little girl ever needed a woman, Isabeau would show up. She lifted the photograph just slightly, enough for Rosemary to see. A young woman in a hospital bed, tired, smiling, holding a baby wrapped in a butter-yellow blanket. Marisol, holding Rosemary. Rosemary took one step forward. She apologized. She needed to sit down. Isabeau softer told her that was all right. She would sit down with her. They walked, both of them, down the hill toward the floating house. Isabeau took her tea with honey, never sugar. Rosemary noticed, because it was the exact way her mother had taken hers. According to Ansel, according to the letters, according to a small line in a birthday letter Rosemary had already read twice. Isabeau did not announce it, did not make a thing of it. She just poured hot water into a chip mug at the kitchen counter, opened the little jar of honey Rosemary had found in the cupboard, spooned some in, stirred. Rosemary watched her. She did not say anything, because saying anything felt like it might break something. Isabeau sat down at the small kitchen table across from her, both hands around the mug. She looked out at the lake through the window. This kitchen was exactly the same, she told Rosemary. Rosemary asked if she had been here before. Once, in a summer a long time ago. Marisol had brought her for a weekend. Marisol had wanted her to meet her father. She had wanted her to see the lake. She had been very proud of both of those things. Isabeau smiled a tired, careful smile. She said they had stayed up all night on the dock, talking about boys, talking about college, talking about the kind of women they were going to be. She stopped. She took a sip of the tea. She had thought about that weekend every day since Marisol had died. Rosemary did not know how to sit across from a woman like this. She did not know where to put her hands. She did not know if she was allowed to ask questions. 21 years of small survival had never prepared her for a woman at a kitchen table who did not want anything from her. Isabeau asked her softly if she could ask her something. Rosemary said she could. How much of her mother did she remember? Rosemary opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. She told Isabeau she remembered none of her, that an hour ago she had found out her mother used to throw too much bread at ducks. Isabeau laughed, actually laughed, a short, cracked laugh. And immediately after, she put her hand over her mouth and her eyes filled. "Oh, honey," she said. Marisol had done that until the day she died. She had fed the pigeons in the courtyard of her apartment building. She had overfed every animal she had ever met. She used to say, "If I have extra, they can have extra." What is the point of any of this if you do not share what you have? Rosemary put her hand flat on the table. She told Isabeau she would like to know things about her mother. Small things, not big things, not sad things, just small things. Isabeau nodded once. She reached across the table. She did not take Rosemary's hand. She just put her own hand near Rosemary's. Close enough that Rosemary could feel the warmth of it. Far enough that Rosemary could decide. She had 38 years of small things, Isabeau said, and she had been keeping them for her. Rosemary did not move for a long moment. Then she slid her hand across the table, and she let their fingers touch. They talked for 4 hours. Rosemary did not notice the time. She did not notice the sun move. She did not notice the second pot of tea. She learned that her mother had dyed a strip of her hair red with Kool-Aid in 11th grade, and had cried about it for a week when it would not come out. She learned that her mother had been terrible at math, truly terrible. She had failed geometry twice. Ansel had sat at the kitchen table every night for a whole spring trying to explain angles. And Marisol had eventually declared tearfully that angles were a lie invented by people who wanted her to feel small. She learned that her mother had been afraid of driving, even after she got her license. She had always let other people drive, even short distances, even to the grocery store. She learned that her mother had wanted to name her Rosemary since she was 17, that she had picked the name out one summer afternoon on a porch. She had told Isabeau that when she had a daughter, she was going to call her Rosemary, like her grandmother's grandmother. Rosemary was the name of a woman who did not apologize for taking up space. Rosemary almost could not hold her mug, because she had spent her whole life apologizing for taking up space. And her mother, a girl on a porch when she was 17, had picked her name specifically, because she had wanted her daughter to be the opposite of that. She learned that her mother had been engaged briefly at 19 to a boy from Illinois, and that she had broken it off 2 months before the wedding because Marisol had said, "Isabeau, when I get married, I want to marry him, not just want to have a wedding." She learned that her mother had eaten toast with only butter on it, never jam, that Marisol had said jam was pushy. She learned that her mother had cried at every animal movie ever made, even the ones with happy endings, because Marisol had said the animals had not known it was fiction. They had probably been scared during filming. Rosemary laughed at that. She laughed properly. Isabeau's face went still for a moment, watching her, not in a strange way, in a way that felt like Isabeau was memorizing something. Then Isabeau said quietly that Rosemary's laugh was Marisol's laugh. Exactly. The same spot in the chest, the same little rise at the end. Rosemary put her hand over her heart, because a woman she had never met had made a laugh. And the laugh had lived inside Rosemary for 21 years. And Rosemary had had absolutely no idea it was not hers alone. Isabeau left that evening. She promised to come back on Sunday. She kissed Rosemary on the top of her head at the top of the hill, very quickly, very gently, the way a person kisses the top of a child's head at bedtime. Then she walked to her car. She drove away. Rosemary stood at the top of the hill for a long time. That was the first time in Rosemary's life that a woman had ever kissed her forehead. She was 21 years old. She was going to remember it forever. The days after Isabeau came were slow. Slow in a way Rosemary had never been allowed to be slow. She woke up when the sun woke her. She sat in the rocking chair for the first hour of every morning. She drank tea, chamomile, with honey, never sugar. She read one of Ansel's letters every day, slowly. She started a small notebook. She wrote down every fact about her mother she was collecting, from the film, from the letters, from Isabeau, from the labels on the trunks downstairs. She built her mother back from small facts the way somebody builds a boat from planks. The color of the walls in a nursery, the chamomile, the bread crusts, the pushy jam, the laugh in the chest, the fear of driving. By the end of that first month, she had 137 facts. She had a mother. Not the mother she would have had if Marisol had lived. Not the mother she should have had, but a mother, constructed, real, held together with pencil marks and cassette tape. Rosemary understood one morning at the kitchen table that this was what her grandfather had actually done for her. He had left her the pieces so she could do the building. So the mother would not just be a thing he had told her about. She would be a thing Rosemary had made out of the small, honest raw material he had preserved for 22 years. That morning she washed the coffee mug. The uncle came about a week later. Rosemary was on the dock again, late afternoon, reading a letter from a woman in Oregon who thought her father's field journals might be in the archive. She looked up. There was a man at the top of the hill, not moving. He was in his 40s, thin, weathered, a denim jacket that had seen more than one hard winter, a small canvas bag over his shoulder that he was carrying wrong, like he was not used to having anything to carry. I was not looking at her. He was looking at the house, like he had seen it before, like he was afraid of it. Rosemary stood up. She called up to him, asked if she could help him. He turned toward her. He did not answer right away. His face was. His face was. Rosemary's breath caught, because she knew that face, not the man. The face, the bones of the face, the exact shape of the eyes. She had seen it that morning in a photograph in the back of a photo album on the second shelf of the reading room. A picture of two children on this very dock. A little girl, maybe 8. A little boy, maybe 4. Both in bathing suits. The little boy making a face. The little girl with one arm slung over his shoulder. On the back in Ansel's writing, Saul and Corbin. Summer '89. Corbin. Her mother's little brother. Her uncle. The uncle who had gone missing after her mother died. Whom Ansel had mentioned in exactly 2 of the 22 letters. Whom Ansel had said in the film that he no longer knew how to find. Rosemary took a step back on the dock. Not out of fear, out of pure shock. The man at the top of the hill said softly that she was her. She said his name back to him quietly. Corbin. He nodded. He had not known if he should come. She asked how he had known she was here. He explained. He had picked up the obituary in a truck stop 3 weeks ago. He had been trying to decide since then. He put a hand on the roof of the Buick to steady himself. He had not heard his sister's daughter's name spoken out loud in 18 years. Rosemary stood on the dock. She did not move. Because she could not. Because the shape of him, the shape of his shoulders, the shape of the way he stood on a hill and could not come closer. She knew that shape. She had lived that shape. That was the shape of a person who had been away from a house for so long that they no longer believed they were allowed to walk back into it. She told him he did not have to stay up there. He said he did not know if he should come down. She asked why. He answered without meaning to. The word honey slipped out of him. Automatic. Like it had been sitting in his mouth for 18 years. Waiting. He caught himself. He apologized. He said he did not have the right to call her that. She looked at him a moment. She told him he could come down. He asked if she was sure. She admitted she was not, but asked him to come down anyway. He came down the hill, slowly, like an old man, slowly, like a man who was afraid the dock was going to disappear under his feet the closer he got. He stopped a few feet from her. He set the canvas bag down on the wood. He put his hands in his jacket pockets, then took them out, then put them back in, then took them out again. He told her she looked like her. She nodded. She had been told. He explained he meant she really looked like her. It was not just, it was the way she stood. It was the tilt of her head. His eyes filled. He apologized. He had said he was not going to do this. She told him it was okay. He shook his head. It was not okay. It was not okay because he was supposed to have been there. When she asked, he looked at her. Every time. He sat down on the edge of the dock. He did not ask permission. He just sat down hard, like his knees had made the decision without him. He told her, fast, as if he was afraid he would talk himself back into a truck at the top of the hill. He told her he had been in college 2 states away when Marisol got sick. He told her he had not come home. He told her Marisol had asked him to finish the semester. He told her he had thought that was the job. He told her he had not known the two jobs were the same job. He told her about the laundromat where he had gotten the phone call. He told her about the shirt he had been folding. He told her he had come home for the funeral. He had stayed 3 days. He had sat at the kitchen table upstairs with Ansel. He had not been able to look at his own father because a 4-year-old with Marisol's mouth had walked in from the neighbor's kitchen and had climbed into her grandmother's lap on this very dock. And he had run. He had run all the way to 18 years. He had drunk. He had drunk a lot. Somewhere in there, he had stopped opening Ansel's letters. And somewhere after that, he had stopped throwing them away. Because throwing them away had hurt more than saving them. And somewhere after that, he had saved them. But he had not read them. He confessed quietly that this was the worst thing he had ever done. Rosemary looked at the lake for a moment. The lake was very still. She asked him how long since he had had a drink. 2 years. She sat with that. Then she told him honestly that she thought 2 years was not enough time. He accepted it. He said quietly that it was enough time to come here. His eyes were red. I wanted her to know he did not expect anything from her. He wanted to say that clearly. He did not want money. He did not want a place to stay. He did not want a relationship. He did not want. He had wanted to see her once, so he could stop wondering, so he could go somewhere else and know that at least he had come at least once. Rosemary looked at him. She thought about a man in a truck outside a window in November, taking a picture through lace curtains because he had needed proof he had seen her once. She thought grief has a shape, and they all have it. She said his name again, careful, deliberate, like a woman learning that names could be something you kept. She invited him inside. She would make chamomile tea. He could tell her one story about her mother, just one. That was the rule, because if he told her everything at once, she would not be able to hold it. He looked at her a long time. His face crumpled once, then folded back up. He offered her a small memory in return. Her mother had told him something once. They had been sitting on a porch swing. Marisol had been 17. She had said to him, Corbin, when I have a daughter, she is going to be so much stronger than me. She is going to know how to ask for things. She is going to know how to open a door and walk into a room. She is not going to wait to be invited. Corbin looked at her. He told her gently that she had just done that. She had just done the thing her mother had wanted her to do. Rosemary put her hand over her mouth. She could not answer. He stood up. He held out his hand. She took it. He helped her up. They walked into the floating house together. He stayed for 3 weeks. He would not stay in the house. Rosemary offered. He refused. He rented a room above the general store in Havenwood from Mrs. Marchbanks for $11 a night. He walked the 7 miles out to Lantern Lake every morning and walked back every night. He said the walk was good for him. He said his knees needed the work. Every evening he came to the porch of the floating house. Rosemary made chamomile tea, always with honey, never with sugar. And every evening he told her one story. Just one. That was the rule. He told her about the time Marisol had climbed the tallest tree in the yard when she was 7 and gotten stuck and refused to come down because the view had been too good. He told her about this time Marisol had taught him 3 chords on a guitar when he had been 10 and she had been 13, and had then immediately made him play those 3 chords over and over while she wrote a song about a dog she did not have. He told her about how Marisol had at 24 sat on this dock with a newborn Rosemary in her arms and had turned to Corbin. He stopped in the middle of the story. He looked at the water. Marisol had turned to him. She had been tired. She had had these dark circles. She had been so tired. And she had looked down at Rosemary. Then she had looked up at him, and she had said, Corbin, look, look at what I made. And Corbin had said, she is beautiful, Saul. And Marisol had said, no, not beautiful, alive. Look at her. She is alive. I made something alive. Corbin said Rosemary had been about 6 weeks old. He had thought about that sentence for 22 years. Rosemary put her head against his shoulder. She had not planned to. She just did. He did not move. He held very still, like a man who had been given a small living thing. By the end of the 3rd week, Corbin had a job. Mrs. Marchbanks had asked him to help her fix the porch on the general store. He was good with his hands. He offered to stay a month if she wanted. She said she wanted. He asked Rosemary if he could stay through the fall. She told him he could. He asked if she was sure. He did not want to overstay. Rosemary called him Uncle Corbin. She said it the way a person says a word they have been practicing quietly for weeks. He looked at her. His eyes filled. He told her quietly that he could not overstay if he tried. Corva Blackwood came back a week later. She had a piece of paper in her hand. Not the same paper. An eviction notice. She stood on the dock the way she had stood the first time. Her sharp coat. Her sharp shoes. But there was something different about her mouth this time. Something looser at the corners. Rosemary had been ready. Rosemary had spent that week with Corbin and Isabeau, going through the letters, the photographs, the manila folders in the box without a label. She had found something. Late one night, under a stack of Ophelia Blackwood's early correspondence, she had found a letter, written by Ophelia, 12 years ago, to a friend, bragging in soft, casual sentences about how she had handled the situation, how she had told the state there was no other family, how she had kept the small monthly guardianship stipend for 11 months before signing Rosemary over, how the old man had never known where to look. Rosemary held that letter now. She met Corva at the top of the dock. She held out the letter. Corva looked at it, read the first line, then the second. The color went out of her face. Corva read. She read all the way to the end. Corva sat down, on the ground, on the gravel, in her sharp shoes. She spoke without looking up. She had not known. She had not known Ophelia had done this. She had been paying for her mother's care for 4 years. She had been telling her kids their grandmother had been a good woman. Rosemary looked at her for a long moment. She said quietly that Corva's mother had probably been a lot of things to a lot of people, and that Rosemary was just one of the people she had not been good to. Corva did not answer for a long time. Then softer, she told Rosemary that she would pull the sail, that she had the authority, that Preston Whitfield was her partner, not her boss. She would pull the sail. She apologized, twice. Rosemary said one thing, that Corva should tell Preston Whitfield something for her. Corva nodded. The lake was not for sale, Rosemary said. Not this year, not next year. The whole valley was under keeping, and keeping was not a thing money was allowed to buy. Corva looked at her a moment. Then she stood up, brushed the gravel off her coat, nodded once. Corva Blackwood got in her car and drove up the hill. She did not come back. The next visitor came alone, on foot, which was strange, because Lantern Lake was 7 miles from anything. Rosemary was sitting on the porch mid-morning. Corbin was in the greenhouse repotting a lemon tree. Isabeau was in the kitchen slicing pears. Then Rosemary saw him, coming down the hill, old denim jacket, silver hair, metal thermos in one hand, a paperback with a broken spine tucked under one arm. Wilder Kane. I had never been up here before. She had never in her life seen Wilder Kane anywhere but on the wooden bench outside the auto shop, or in the doorway of his little front office, or waving from the sidewalk at 3rd Street. He was here. Rosemary stood up. Corbin came out of the greenhouse. Something in Rosemary's face made him stop. She walked up the hill. She met Wilder halfway. Wilder was 70-something. He walked like a man who had been driving too long. He stopped when he saw her coming. He looked at the ground. He looked at the lake. He did everything but look at her. He told her quietly that he owed her a conversation. Rosemary waited. He explained. Ansel had called him in the summer 3 years ago, had asked him one thing, keep an eye on his line. That was all Ansel had said. Ansel had told him Wilder, my grandkid just landed in Copperton. She rented a room above a laundromat. She is going to need a landlord. She is going to need somebody who leaves her alone and does not ask questions. That is the job. Do not tell her. Do not tell anybody. Just keep an eye on the line. Wilder looked at his boots. I had known Ansel since they were 19 years old. They had worked the same shipyard up in Bath one summer, fitting boilers into fishing rigs. 2 skinny kids who had lied about their experience to get the job. They had been friends for 52 years. Ansel had asked him one favor in all 52 of them. So when the room above the auto shop had opened up, Wilder had found her a job at Halstead's through his niece Marcelle. He had dropped her rent to $200 a month. He had left apples on her doorknob when she looked skinny. He had waved, that was all. Ansel had asked for a landlord who would not close the door on his grandkid the way the world had. Not a father, not a rescuer, just a landlord. Wilder had said yes. He had never said a word. Because Ansel had asked him not to. Because Ansel had wanted her to find him herself. Rosemary stared at him. She asked quietly how long he had known. He told her. She thought about the sandwiches, the apples, Marcel at the diner who never pushed, the $200 a month that had allowed her to save, the wave every night, the nod from the pastor at the corner church every Sunday, who she now realized standing on this hill had probably also been on that call. A quiet net. She had lived inside a quiet net for 3 years, and she had thought she was alone. Wilder cleared his throat. He waited. He was not the kind of man who filled a silence with anything he did not have to say. Rosemary said his name, softly. He looked at her. She thanked him. He shook his head once, nodded once. He told her gruffly that it had been the easiest favor he had ever done. She asked him if he wanted to come down, to meet Isabeau, to meet Corbin, to see the house. He looked at the floating house from the top of the hill. He looked at the copper bell. He looked at the greenhouse. He shook his head. He would come another day. He was not ready today. He said it in a voice that sounded a lot like her own. Rosemary understood. He needed the top of the hill, the way she had needed the porch, the way Corbin had needed the top of the driveway. Some people needed the edge before they could come in. She told him she would leave the porch light on. He nodded once more. He walked back up to a truck she had not seen park. He got in. He drove away. She watched the road for a while after he was gone. Then she walked back down to the floating house, to her uncle in the greenhouse, to Isabeau in the kitchen, to the coffee mug she now drank out of every morning, to the 6 rosemary plants that had known her before she had known herself. She had not been alone. She had never been alone. She had only been on the wrong side of the wall. The last thing was the cedar chest, the one Ansel had mentioned in the film, upstairs, in the small bedroom, at the foot of the bed. Rosemary had walked past it every day for 6 weeks. She had not opened it. She did not know why. She knew now. Because there had been things she had needed to be first. She had needed to be a woman who tore up a check. A woman who let an older woman drink tea with her at a kitchen table. A woman who put her hand on an uncle's shoulder when he could not stop shaking. A woman who could look Wilder Kane in the eye and thank him without falling apart. She had needed to become somebody before she opened that chest. She sat in front of it now, on the wide plank floor of the small upstairs bedroom. The window was open, the lake was orange, the sun was going down. She lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, tied with a small square of faded ribbon that had once been white, was a butter yellow baby sweater, very small, newborn sized, hand knitted, slightly uneven in the sleeves, ripped out and restarted in 4 places. Finished, finished. She lifted it out. She held it in both hands. Her mother had finished it. Her mother had finished the sweater before Rosemary had been born. Her mother had folded it in tissue paper, tied it with ribbon, set it aside, waiting for her. Rosemary sat in the last orange light of the day, on the floor of the floating house, on Lantern Lake, with her mother's sweater in her lap, and she cried the way you cry when the story has finally come all the way around. Not sadness, not grief, something older. The sound a woman makes when she finally understands that a thing she has been carrying alone was never hers to carry alone. Because someone, a long time ago, in a warm October kitchen, had already been knitting for her. 3 months later, on the last Saturday of September, Rosemary held the first gathering at the floating house. She had not planned it as an annual thing. She had just put a small notice on the website she had built. She had called it the Lantern Keeper Registry. She had written, if you have found something here that belonged to your family, and if you would like to come see the lake where it was kept, please come on the last Saturday of September. There will be a small ceremony at dusk. There will be paper lanterns. There will be tea. She had thought maybe 30 people would come. Nearly 300 came. They came from more than a dozen states. They came in cars and campers and one small yellow bus rented by a family from Missouri who all wanted to come together. They came with photographs, with letters, with small objects. They came with their grown children and their grandchildren. They came mostly older, 60, 70, 80. Women, mostly women. Women in soft cardigans. Women with silver hair. Women who had been carrying small, unfinished griefs for a very long time, and who had, because of a floating house on a quiet lake, and a young woman who had inherited a promise, been given something back. They filled the shore around Lantern Lake. They stood on the grass. They sat on blankets. They passed around thermoses of coffee. They talked to each other in the low, easy voices of people who had all been given the same gift and who all recognized each other for it, even though they had never met. Ivy Talbot was there. She was 91. She had driven 6 hours with her sister's daughter to hold the bundle of letters from Meade Cortland at last. She had said in the doorway of the reading room that she had thought about him every day since 1959, and that she was glad finally to have his last words in her own hand. Rufus Den Hollander's daughter was there. She had cried at the sight of the pocket watch. She had said softly that she had never known her father had one. The mother of Adric Volpe was not there. She had been gone for 11 years, but her granddaughter had come. She had held the small baby shoes in tissue paper for a long time in the archive room. She had cried without making a sound. She had asked Rosemary if she could take them with her. She had said she wanted her own daughter to know the uncle she had never met. Rosemary had told her yes. Take them. That was what they had been kept for. At dusk, Rosemary handed out paper boats, small ones, with little tea lights inside. She said into a microphone she had borrowed from Mrs. Marchbanks that people should write a name. Anyone. Someone they loved. Someone they were still learning about. Someone they had never got to meet. Then they would put them on the water. They wrote, all of them. 300 small hands, 300 small names. They walked to the shore. They knelt at the edge of the lake. They set the boats on the water. The lake filled with light. It filled slowly. Then all at once, 300 small flames, drifting away from the shore, some clumped together, some drifting alone. all of them moving gently out into the dark water. Rosemary stood at the end of the dock. Isabeau was on her left. Isabeau's hand was on the small of Rosemary's back. Steady. Corbin was on her right. Corbin had his hands in his jacket pockets. He was looking at the water. He was not crying, but he was not crying either. He was going to be somewhere in between for a while. Wilder Kane was at the top of the hill, leaning against the door of his truck, watching. He would not come down, but he had come, behind them. 300 people were quiet. Rosemary stepped to the microphone. She was wearing the butter yellow sweater, the small one. Isabeau and Mrs. Marchbanks had sat together at the kitchen table for a week and let out the seams, reknit the cuffs, made it long enough, made it hers. The sweater her mother had finished, wearing across 21 years. She began quietly. She had been trying to figure out what to say tonight for weeks. She could not. So she was just going to say what was true. She had grown up believing nobody was looking for her. She had grown up believing she was the kind of person you could sit down and forget. She had grown up believing that if she was useful enough, quiet enough, small enough, people would let her stay in the room she was in. She had been wrong. She had been wrong about every single one of those things. Her grandfather had looked for her for 22 years. A woman she had not known had made her a promise before she was born and kept it for 21 years. Her uncle had carried a shame the size of the sky for 18 years. And one day he had finally set the shame down and driven here and walked down a hill and let her see him. A man in a denim jacket had done the smallest, kindest thing in the world for 3 years without asking for a thank you. Her mother had made a tape 2 months before she was born, just in case. She had made it in case she did not get to tell her. She had left it in a small tin box under a floorboard. Her grandfather had kept it there for 22 years without ever listening to it. So the first person that voice had ever reached was her. Her voice caught. She let it catch. She let the microphone hear it. If a little girl who had spent her whole life in a window seat had been loved that hard by that many people she had never got to meet, then she promised them, no one in this room was alone. No one they had loved was gone. No one who had loved them had ever stopped. Love kept looking, even after they could not see it, even after years, even after everything. She looked out at the water, at the 300 small lights drifting into the dark. She said softly, "Thank you for finding me, Grandpa. I found you too." The lanterns kept moving out into the middle of the lake. Small, small lights. Isabeau squeezed her hand. Corbin leaned over and very quietly kissed the top of her head. At the top of the hill, Wilder Kane took his hat off and held it against his chest. Behind them, 300 people quietly began to cry. Not loudly, just quietly. The way people cry when something inside them long shut has finally been allowed to open. Somewhere above, one loon called across the water. The lake carried the lights. The lights kept going. The floating house rocked gently in the dark. And Rosemary Ellsworth, 21 years old, once a girl in a window seat, once a girl in a mudroom, once a girl at the end of a driveway with a canvas bag, stood at the end of the dock, in a butter yellow sweater her mother had knitted 22 years before, and knew, for the first time in her life,